She was the daughter of a powerful man. He was his hunting dog. But love never asked for permission. Isabella had always lived a life that many people only dreamt of, a life filled with the finest things. Her father, a powerful man in the town, owned large stretches of land and had wealth that seemed endless. People looked at him with respect, almost fear. He was known for his coldness, his ability to control anyone who stood in his way. Isabella, however, was different from him in many ways. Despite growing up in this world of riches, she was not as cold as her father. She often questioned why things had to be this way, why life had to revolve around wealth, power, and status. Still, she never questioned the life that was laid out before her. Her father had already chosen a path for her, a marriage to a man of his standing, someone who could help protect the family's fortune. Isabella had always obeyed his wishes, not out of fear, but out of a sense of duty. She was the daughter of a powerful man, after all, and her place in society was set. But somewhere deep inside her, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to life than what her father expected. Jack, on the other hand, had always lived a different kind of life. He was born into poverty, raised in the shadows of the grand estates that Isabella's family owned. His father was a farmer who worked hard every day just to make ends meet. Jack, however, had always been different from the other boys in the village. While most of them dreamed of becoming wealthy or powerful, Jack had only one goal: to survive. When Jack was old enough, he started working for Isabella's father, hired as a tracker and a guard. He was a man of few words, known for his exceptional ability to track animals and deal with any threat to the estate. Despite being only a servant in the eyes of many, Jack held a quiet respect for the land and the people he protected. His loyalty to Isabella's father was unwavering, even though he knew that he was nothing more than a tool in the eyes of the powerful man.
Every morning, Jack would wake up before the sun, putting on his worn clothes and preparing for the long day ahead.
He would head into the forest to track animals for the estate's hunt, sometimes for days at a time. He never complained, never asked for anything more than what was required. His life was simple, but he had come to find peace in it. It was a life of solitude, of duty, and of quiet pride. Isabella rarely noticed Jack, as he was always in the background, part of the estate's machinery. She had heard his name, of course. He was the one who kept the property safe, who made sure that nothing threatened her father's land. But she had never really spoken to him, never had any reason to. Jack was just another face in the crowd, another servant who worked to maintain the family's wealth and security. But one day, everything changed. It started as a normal day. Isabella was in the grand hall of the estate having tea with her mother. Her father was away on business, and it was one of the rare moments when Isabella was allowed to be herself, away from the constant expectations that surrounded her. As she gazed out the window, her eyes wandered over the vast land that stretched out before her, the rolling hills, the thick forests, the distant mountains. It was all so beautiful, so peaceful. But she couldn't escape the feeling that there was something more out there, something that she could never have, something beyond the walls of this estate.
"Are you listening, my dear?"
her mother asked, snapping Isabella from her thoughts. She nodded absently, not really hearing her mother's words. She had heard the same things 100 times before: the importance of good breeding, the need to make a strategic marriage, the duties of being the daughter of a powerful man. "Isabella, your future is important. You must understand that," her mother continued, her voice firm. "Your father has worked hard for everything we have, and you must carry that legacy." Isabella forced a smile. She had heard it all before, but it never felt right to her. That's when she saw him. Jack was walking across the estate's grounds, heading toward the forest with a rifle slung over his shoulder. He was walking with purpose, his head down, his face set in concentration. He didn't notice her staring from the window, but Isabella couldn't help but watch him. There was something about the way he moved, the quiet confidence in his stride, that caught her attention. She had never really looked at him before. All she had ever known was that he was a servant. But now, for the first time, she saw him as a man, not just someone who worked for her father. Isabella didn't know why she felt this way. She was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the land. She was destined for a life of privilege and high society. Jack was just a servant, a man who worked in the background, never asking for more than what was given to him. But in that moment, as she watched him walk away, something stirred within her, a feeling she couldn't explain. That evening, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about Jack. She tried to focus on her father's plans for her upcoming marriage, but her thoughts kept drifting back to him. Why had she never really looked at him before? What was it about him that had caught her attention? She told herself that it was nothing, just a passing thought. After all, she had no business thinking about him. But the next day, she found herself walking toward the forest, a place she rarely ventured. The air was cool, the trees whispered with the wind, and the ground was soft beneath her feet. She wasn't sure why she was there, but she felt drawn to it. As she walked deeper into the woods, she heard a rustling in the bushes. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned, expecting to see an animal or a servant, but instead she found Jack standing there, a bow and arrow in hand. He was staring at her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice low. Isabella was taken aback. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't supposed to be out here, not without an escort or a purpose. But for some reason she didn't feel afraid. Instead, she felt a strange sense of calm. I was just walking," she said, her voice shaky. Jack nodded, still watching her with that quiet intensity. "It's a good place to think," he said. "A place where you can be alone." Isabella nodded slowly, realizing that she was already being pulled into this strange connection with him. She couldn't explain why, but she felt like this was a place where no one would judge her, where she could be herself, even if just for a moment. They stood in silence for a few moments, the tension between them growing. Isabella had no idea what she was doing or why she was there, but something in her told her that this was just the beginning. Jack turned to leave, but before he did, he looked back at her. "Be careful," he said, his voice softer now. "There's more danger in these woods than you realize." Isabella watched him disappear into the trees, her heart beating faster. She didn't know what this meant, but she knew that something had shifted. She could no longer ignore the feelings that were stirring inside her. Jack was more than just a servant. He was someone she was beginning to care about, someone she couldn't ignore. The following days felt different to Isabella. Though she continued to live her life as she always had, something had shifted. The encounter with Jack lingered in her thoughts. It wasn't just his presence that had stayed with her. It was the way he had looked at her, the softness in his voice that didn't belong to a servant but to someone who, in some strange way, understood her. She tried to push the feeling aside, focusing on her duties and the social events her father insisted she attend. But no matter how much she tried to ignore it, the memory of that day in the woods kept coming back to her. It wasn't long before Isabella found herself wandering toward the woods again, despite herself. The air was warm, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the estate. It was a quiet evening, and her father was away again, busy with matters that kept him occupied for days at a time. Her mother was preoccupied with some arrangements for an upcoming event, so Isabella took the opportunity to escape. She wasn't sure what she expected to find, but the feeling that had started in the forest the last time seemed to be calling her again. As she walked deeper into the trees, the sounds of the estate grew distant, replaced by the rustling leaves and the chirping of birds. She felt a sense of calm wash over her, as if the forest held a secret that only she could understand. Isabella walked for what seemed like hours, until she found herself in a part of the woods she hadn't been before. It was a secluded place, untouched and quiet. She paused for a moment, taking in the scenery. The air was thick with the smell of pine and earth, and the light filtered through the branches above in a gentle golden haze. Then she heard it, a familiar sound. A rustling in the bushes, followed by the faint crunch of leaves underfoot. Isabella froze, her heart skipping a beat. She didn't have to look to know who it was. Jack appeared from the trees, his face partially shadowed by the brim of his hat. He was carrying a rifle, but there was no tension in his posture. He didn't seem surprised to see her. Rather, he seemed almost expectant, as though he had been waiting for her. "I didn't think you'd come back," Jack said, his voice steady and calm, though there was a trace of curiosity in his tone.
Isabella felt a sudden rush of embarrassment. She had no reason to be here, no explanation for her actions.
She was a daughter of a powerful man, expected to act with dignity, to stay within the boundaries of her world. But here she was, out in the woods, drawn to a man who was nothing more than a servant. "I didn't plan to," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. She found herself unable to look away from him, her eyes caught by the way he stood there, so unburdened by the expectations that governed her life. Jack didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slightly, as if understanding something unspoken. "I've been coming out here a lot lately. The woods, they make things simpler, clearer," he said. Isabella felt a strange connection to his words. The woods, she realized, were the one place where she could breathe, where the weight of her world didn't press down on her. It was the only place where she could be herself, even if just for a little while. "Do you come here often?" she asked, surprised by the question but feeling compelled to ask it. Jack glanced down at the rifle in his hands, running his fingers lightly over the barrel, as if deep in thought. "Whenever I need to clear my head," he said, his gaze lifting to meet hers. "Out here I can think without anyone telling me what I should do." She knew exactly what he meant. Everywhere she went she was expected to follow rules, to be perfect. The pressure was constant, and it left her feeling suffocated at times. But in the woods there was no one to judge her, no expectations. She was free, at least for a short while. They stood there in silence, the sounds of the forest filling the space between them. Isabella couldn't remember the last time she had felt this comfortable with anyone, let alone someone like Jack. There was no pretense, no expectations. He wasn't trying to impress her, and for the first time in a long while she didn't feel like she had to impress him either. "I didn't mean to interrupt you," Isabella said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper.
I needed some air."
Jack gave her a small smile, one that was almost imperceptible, but enough to make Isabella's heart skip a beat. "You're not interrupting anything. This place, it's always open to anyone who needs it." Isabella didn't know why, but she felt a strange sense of comfort in his words. It was as though he was inviting her into his world, into a space where there were no rules or expectations, just freedom. She had spent so many years trapped in her father's world where everything was calculated and planned, but out here, with Jack, it was different. It felt like she could breathe. "I wish I could stay here longer," Isabella admitted, her voice tinged with regret. She glanced around, as if trying to take in every detail, every moment. "But I can't. I have responsibilities, things I must do." Jack nodded, though his face seemed distant for a moment, as if the thought of responsibilities was foreign to him. "I understand," he said softly, then added, "but sometimes it's good to forget about them, even just for a little while." Isabella thought about his words. It was true. She had spent so much of her life following rules, meeting expectations, that she had never stopped to think about what she truly wanted. Being with Jack in this quiet, secluded place made her realize how much she longed for a life of freedom, freedom from the pressure, from the constant demands. But she knew it wasn't possible. She was the daughter of a powerful man, and that came with certain responsibilities. She had a duty to uphold her family's legacy, to marry someone of her father's choosing. That was the life she had been given, the life she had to follow. "I should go," Isabella said reluctantly, breaking the silence. "Father will wonder where I am." Jack didn't argue. He simply nodded, his face unreadable. "Take care of yourself, Isabella," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of something deeper than just concern. Isabella nodded, her heart heavy with the unspoken words between them. She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, Jack's voice stopped her. "You don't have to do everything they want," he said, the words lingering in the air between them. "You can choose your own path." For a moment, Isabella stood still, caught between the world she had known and the world Jack was offering her. A world of simplicity, of freedom. But she knew she couldn't stay. Her father's world was waiting for her, and the expectations of her life were too strong to ignore.
I know, she said softly, not looking back as she walked away.
But in her heart, something had changed. She wasn't sure where this feeling would lead, but she knew that Jack had given her something priceless. The idea that she had a choice. And that thought, that possibility, would stay with her long after she left the woods. Days passed, and though Isabella tried to maintain her usual routine, everything felt different. The encounter with Jack had opened something within her that she couldn't close again. It was as if the walls she had built around herself, to protect her from the world and its expectations, had suddenly cracked. Each time she saw Jack, each time they exchanged a few words or shared a quiet glance, she felt an undeniable pull toward him, a connection that she could no longer ignore. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of her duties and responsibilities. "A woman of your standing must marry wisely," he had told her, more times than she could count. "Your marriage is not just about love. It's about legacy, power, and alliances. You must understand that." Isabella had always understood this. But now, after meeting Jack, after feeling the freedom in his presence, the idea of a marriage arranged for power and status seemed increasingly foreign to her. The pull she felt for Jack wasn't just about his strength or his quiet intelligence. It was more than that. It was the way he made her feel when they were together. A feeling of being seen, not as the daughter of a powerful man, but as a person, someone with hopes and dreams of her own. She had spent so many years following rules, living up to the expectations of everyone around her, that she had forgotten what it felt like to truly live for herself. But the danger was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. Jack was a servant, no matter how kind or caring he was, no matter how much she enjoyed his company. He could never be more than that. She was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the land, and the path laid before her was one of power, alliances, and political marriages. To stray from that path would bring shame, not just on herself, but on her entire family. Despite these thoughts, Isabella couldn't stop herself from seeking out Jack again. There was something in his presence that gave her a sense of freedom, a sense that for just a moment she could let go of all the expectations and simply be herself. One evening after dinner, she found herself once again walking toward the woods. It had become a habit now, this quiet escape from the world that weighed heavily on her. She told herself it was for fresh air, a brief moment of peace, but deep down she knew it was because she wanted to see Jack again. This time, as she approached the familiar clearing, she saw him before he saw her. Jack was standing with his back to her, looking out over the horizon, the last rays of the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He seemed lost in thought, his face serious as if contemplating something important. Isabella hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should turn back. She knew how dangerous it was to keep meeting with him, to keep feeding the feelings that were growing stronger each day. But she couldn't bring herself to leave. The pull was too strong. She stepped forward, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot giving her away. Jack turned at the sound, and their eyes met. For a moment neither of them spoke, just standing there in the quiet of the woods, the weight of their unspoken connection hanging in the air between them. "Isabella," Jack said softly, his voice carrying a hint of surprise but also something deeper, something that made her heart race. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I didn't expect to see you again," her voice quieter than she intended.
I needed to be here."
Jack nodded slowly, as if he understood. "It's the woods," he said. "They make it easier to think, to clear your head." Isabella glanced around, taking in the familiar sights of the forest, the trees, the soft rustling of the leaves, the distant call of birds. It was peaceful, far from the demands of the world she had left behind. In the woods, with Jack, she could almost forget who she was supposed to be. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her words coming out more easily than she had expected. "About my life, about what I'm supposed to do." Jack turned his full attention to her now, his gaze intense. "And what have you decided?" he asked, though there was an underlying uncertainty in his voice, as if he already knew the answer. Isabella looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of the decision she had been avoiding for so long. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've always followed the path my father set for me, but I don't want to live my life just because it's expected of me. I want more than that." Jack took a step closer, his presence calming but intense. "Then why don't you choose it?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "Why don't you choose your own path?" Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. The question hung in the air, as simple and yet as impossible as it seemed. Could she really choose her own path? Could she leave behind everything she had ever known, everything that had been planned for her, to follow her heart? She shook her head, the doubt creeping in. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "There's so much at stake. My father, my family's name. None of that matters if you're not happy," Jack said, his words cutting through her hesitation. "What matters is you, your life, what you want." Isabella stared at him, her chest tightening. There was something about his words, something so certain in the way he spoke, that made her question everything. Could she really choose her own life, even if it meant walking away from everything she had known? But the fear was there too. Fear of the consequences, fear of disappointing her father, fear of losing the life she had always been told to want. "I don't know if I'm brave enough," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't know if I can leave it all behind." Jack stepped closer, his expression softening.
You don't have to do it all at once. You just have to decide what's important to you.
You can start small. You can start by choosing your own happiness. Isabella felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had always done what was expected of her, but now she found herself at a crossroads, a moment where she had to choose between the life that had been planned for her and the life she wanted. And Jack, in his quiet way, was offering her something she had never been able to ask for: freedom. The silence stretched between them as Isabella considered his words. She had always followed the path her father had set out for her. She had always obeyed, always complied with the expectations of others. But now, for the first time in her life, she realized she had the power to choose. She didn't have to live in the shadow of her family's name. She didn't have to follow the rules that had been written for her. Isabella looked up at Jack, her eyes full of uncertainty but also something new: hope. "I want to be free," she whispered. Jack smiled, the warmth of his expression making her heart flutter. "Then be free," he said softly. "You have that choice." In that moment, Isabella knew she had to make a decision. She didn't know where this path would lead, or what consequences she would face for straying from the life that had been planned for her. But for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. With Jack by her side, she felt like she could take the first step toward a new life, a life where she chose her own happiness. The days following that conversation were a whirlwind for Isabella. The decision she had avoided for so long now stood before her, clear and undeniable. She could no longer pretend that her life could continue as it always had, locked in the cage of expectation and duty. Jack had given her a new perspective, one that made her realize that her happiness could be more than a fleeting dream. But as much as Isabella longed for freedom, the weight of her family's expectations pressed heavily on her shoulders. Her father was not a man who tolerated rebellion, and her entire life had been shaped by his desires and ambitions. The life of luxury and privilege that had been promised to her was a cage, as much as it was a gift. To step outside of it, to choose a life that was hers, and not dictated by others, would be a monumental act of defiance. Isabella spent countless hours in her chambers, pacing back and forth, torn between the two worlds.
The life of wealth and power that her father had laid out for her, and the uncertain, dangerous road that Jack had shown her. A road where she could be her true self, free from the chains of obligation.
The choice felt impossible, but with each passing day, it became more and more clear that she could not ignore what was in her heart. Her father's looming presence never allowed her to escape from his expectations for long. He would call her to his study to discuss matters of business, to remind her of her duty to the family, to reiterate the importance of the marriage she had arranged for her. The man she was supposed to marry was the son of a powerful ally, someone whose family's wealth and influence would bolster their standing even higher. It was a perfect match on paper, but in her heart, Isabella knew it was not what she wanted. It was not love. It was a transaction, a merger of two powerful families, nothing more. Jack, on the other hand, had no wealth, no titles. He had nothing to offer except himself. Yet in the short time they had spent together, Isabella had learned that he offered her something far more valuable than any fortune could buy: a chance to live freely, to be seen as a person, not a commodity. She didn't need a title to be happy, but she couldn't shake the fear that choosing Jack would mean losing everything she had ever known. One evening, after another tense discussion with her father, Isabella found herself alone in the garden, staring up at the sky. The weight of the world seemed to press down on her, the stars above looking distant and unreachable. She couldn't deny the way she felt when she was with Jack, the way he made her feel like she mattered. There, in the quiet of the night, she finally made up her mind. She would go to him. Her heart pounded as she walked toward the forest, the familiar path feeling both comforting and terrifying. The further she walked, the more her resolve strengthened. The path ahead would not be easy. She knew that if she chose Jack, she would face her father's wrath, and perhaps the wrath of the world around her. But she could no longer live a life that wasn't truly hers. She couldn't spend another day in the shadows pretending to be someone she was not. When she arrived at the clearing where Jack often spent his time, she didn't see him immediately. The place was quiet, and the soft rustling of the leaves seemed louder than usual. She took a few steps forward, looking around, until she finally saw him, standing by the edge of the forest. He was leaning against a tree, staring out into the distance. He didn't seem to notice her at first, lost in his thoughts. Isabella hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before walking toward him. The sound of her footsteps made him turn, and when their eyes met, she saw the surprise in his gaze. "Isabella," Jack said, his voice soft yet full of concern. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I've made my decision." Jack looked at her carefully, as though searching for something in her expression. "What decision?" "I can't keep living this life," Isabella said, her words coming out in a rush. "The life my father has planned for me, it's not mine." "I don't want it anymore. I want something different." I want to be with you." There was a moment of silence, and for a second, Isabella wondered if she had made a mistake, if her words were too bold, too sudden. But then Jack's face softened, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You don't have to choose between us," he said gently. "You don't have to choose a life of duty or a life of freedom. You can choose both." Isabella shook her head, her heart heavy. "I can't. My family, my father, they won't let me. I will lose everything." Jack stepped closer to her, his presence comforting yet filled with an unspoken intensity. "But what will you have left if you stay in a life that isn't yours?" he asked softly. "You'll have everything that was given to you, but nothing that truly belongs to you." Isabella's chest tightened as his words sunk in. He was right. What would she have left? A life of comfort, of wealth, of power, but at what cost? She had spent so much of her life trying to please others, living up to the expectations of those around her, that she had forgotten what it meant to live for herself, to make choices based on her own happiness. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if I can't do it? What if I regret it?" Jack reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll be with you. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Tears filled Isabella's eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable. She had spent so much of her life hiding behind a mask, pretending to be something she was not. But here, with Jack, she felt like she could finally be herself, like she could finally stop pretending. She reached up, taking Jack's hands in hers, feeling the warmth of his touch. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I want to try. I want to live my life, not the life they've chosen for me." Jack smiled, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and understanding. "Then we'll do it together. You're stronger than you think." In that moment, Isabella knew that no matter what lay ahead, she had made the right choice. She had chosen herself. She had chosen a life where she could be free. A life where love and happiness weren't dictated by duty or power, but by the simple truth of what was in her heart. As they stood there, the weight of the world lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in her life, Isabella felt truly free. She had made her decision, and no matter what the future held, she was ready to face it. With Jack by her side, she knew that anything was possible. Isabella's heart raced as she stepped away from the familiar walls of her family's estate. It had only been a few days since she made her decision to choose her own path, and with every step she took, the weight of what she was leaving behind seemed to grow heavier. But there was something else in her heart, something lighter, something that filled her with hope. She had chosen freedom, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly living for herself. She hadn't told her father yet. The idea of facing him, of telling him she was leaving the life he had planned for her, was terrifying. She knew that he would never understand, and his anger would be fierce. But Isabella also knew that the longer she waited, the harder it would be. She had made her decision, and now there was no turning back. Jack was waiting for her when she arrived at the small cabin on the outskirts of the estate, a place he had found for them to stay far from the watchful eyes of her family. The cabin was humble but warm, with a small fireplace and a few pieces of furniture that Jack had brought from the estate. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, a space where they could build a new life together, away from the expectations of the world that had once held them captive.
As Isabella entered the cabin, she felt a sense of peace wash over her.
The air was thick with the smell of wood and fire, and the soft crackling of the flames in the hearth made her feel safe. For the first time, she was surrounded by only what mattered, the man she loved, and the chance to create something real. Jack stood by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. His face was calm, but Isabella could see the excitement in his eyes. He had always been a man of few words, but when it came to her, there was a warmth in his gaze that spoke volumes.
"You're here," he said softly, turning to her.
His voice was steady, but there was a softness to it that made Isabella's heart flutter.
"I knew you would be."
Isabella smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire.
"I couldn't stay away," she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
Jack walked over to her, taking her hands in his. His touch was gentle, but there was an unspoken strength in it, a reassurance that everything would be okay.
"Are you sure about this?" he asked, his brow furrowing slightly.
Isabella nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. It wasn't easy to leave everything behind, to turn her back on a life of luxury and power."
But in Jack's presence, Isabella felt like she could do anything. He had shown her a world where happiness wasn't tied to wealth or status, a world where love was the only thing that mattered. Jack kissed her forehead gently, his hands lingering on her shoulders. "I'll protect you," he said, his voice low and full of promise. "We'll build a life here, together, no matter what happens."
Isabella felt tears well up in her eyes, but she didn't stop them.
For the first time, they were tears of relief, not fear. She had made the right choice. She had chosen love, and love had never felt so real. The following days were filled with uncertainty. Every time they stepped outside the cabin, they were aware of the risks. Isabella knew that her father would eventually find out about her disappearance, and when he did, he would stop at nothing to bring her back. But for now, she and Jack had each other, and that was enough. They worked together to build a small garden behind the cabin, growing vegetables and herbs. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Jack taught Isabella how to tend to the plants, how to gather firewood, and how to make the most of what little they had. They spent their days outside, surrounded by the beauty of nature, and their nights by the fire, sharing stories and dreams of the future. Despite the peacefulness of their new life, Isabella couldn't ignore the nagging fear in the back of her mind. What would her father do when he found out she was gone? Would he send someone to find her? Would he try to force her back into the life he had planned for her? One evening, as they sat by the fire, Isabella's thoughts drifted to her father. She hadn't seen him in days, and though she had told herself she was ready for whatever came next, a part of her still feared what he might do. "I wonder what he's doing," Isabella said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wonder if he's looking for me." Jack looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "He probably is," he said, his voice steady. "But we can't control that. All we can do is live the life we've chosen."
Isabella nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that crept over her.
She had chosen this life, but the consequences of her decision were still unknown. Would her father come for her? Would he try to force her back into the life she had escaped? The next morning, their fears were realized. A group of men arrived at the cabin, their horses kicking up dust as they rode toward the small home that had become their sanctuary. Isabella's heart raced as she watched them approach. She knew immediately who they were. They were her father's men, sent to find her and bring her back. Jack stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "Stay inside," he said quietly, his voice calm but filled with urgency.
I'll handle this evidence. Isabella didn't want to stay inside. She wanted to face her father's men head-on to show them that she was not afraid.
But Jack's voice was steady, and his presence gave her a sense of calm. "Be careful," she whispered, before stepping back into the cabin. Jack went outside to meet the men, his expression unreadable. The leader of the group, a tall man with graying hair, stepped forward, his eyes hard as stone.
"We've been sent by Lord Andrews," he said, his voice gruff. "You're to come with us, miss."
"Your father demands it." Isabella's heart sank as she heard the man's words. She knew this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it all the more real. Her father was not going to let her go without a fight. Jack didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his eyes never leaving the men in front of him.
"She's not going anywhere," he said, his voice firm. "She made her choice, and I'll protect her from anyone who tries to take her." The men exchanged glances, clearly surprised by Jack's defiance, but they didn't back down. "You don't understand," the leader said. "This is bigger than you. The Lord's orders are not to be ignored." Jack took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "I don't care about your Lord's orders," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I care about what's right, and what's right is that she stays here. With me." For a moment, there was a tense silence. Then, the leader of the group stepped back, clearly unwilling to engage further. "This isn't over," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "Your father will hear about this." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the cabin, his step steady. Isabella was waiting for him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had feared this moment, but now that it had come, she realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had chosen this life. She had chosen love, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Jack walked inside, closing the door behind him. He didn't speak immediately, but Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "They'll be back," he said finally, his voice low. "But we can't back down. We have to stay strong." Isabella nodded, her resolve strengthening.
I won't go back, she said, her voice steady. Not for anyone.
Jack smiled, the warmth returning to his eyes. "Neither will I," he said. And in that moment, Isabella knew that no matter what happened next, she had made the right choice. She had chosen her own path, a path filled with love, freedom, and the courage to face whatever came their way. Together, they would stand strong.